This brings us to our main topic, not an indie little genre, not something that is tiny and lacking for funding, but as always, big old superhero projects with people weighing in on them.
And not favorably, and I have to tell you, I was shocked by this.
Yeah.
Were you shocked by this?
You know, I wasn't shocked given the full quote. I actually was like, this is quite reasonable. Let's read about this. This is Seth Rogen weighing in on Marvel movies. He was basically saying that he feels they're geared towards kids, not to him as an adult with no children, but also understands and respects Marvel in the space. So let me read this full quote. I think that Kevin Feige is a brilliant guy, and I think a lot of the filmmakers he's hired to make these movies are great filmmakers. But as someone who doesn't have children, it is all kind of geared towards kids, you know? There are times where I'll forget, I'll watch one of these things, and as an adult with no kids and be like, oh, this just is not for me. Truthfully, without Marvel, the boys wouldn't exist or be interesting. I'm aware of that. I think it was only Marvel in the marketplace, it would be bad. But I think it isn't, clearly. An example I'm always quoting is, there's a point in history where a bunch of filmmakers would be sitting around being like, do you think we'll ever make a movie that's not a Western again? Everything's a Western. Westerns dominate the fucking movies. If it doesn't have a hat and a gun and a carriage, people aren't going to go see it anymore. The situation, sadly, is that we now have two separate fields. There's worldwide audiovisual entertainment and there's cinema. They still overlap from time to time, but that's becoming increasingly rare. And I fear that the financial dominance of one is being used to marginalize and even belittle the existence of the other.
Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Fume. Be smart. Don't start. Kick the habit. Put it out before it puts you out. All phrases we've heard 100 times, and yet we still continue to have bad habits. Today's sponsor, Fume, is on a mission to accelerate humanity's breakup from the bad habits that consume far too many of us. Fume is a natural diffusive device that uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habit for a positive one. You see, Fume is not a vape, it's a non-electronic device designed to transform your negative habits. Because instead of pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals like a vape, Fume uses cores infused with plants like peppermint and cinnamon for delicious natural flavors. And Fume's new version 2 model is snappy and tactile. With an adjustable airflow dial and a magnetic end cap, your fingers will always have something to do. The device itself is really attractive, and once I popped in the core and took my first inhale of it, it tasted fantastic. Guys, the easiest way to stop a bad habit is to switch to a positive one, and Fume is designed to perfectly do just that. So head over to tryfume.com and use the promo code Campea to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Journey Pack comes with 3 unique flavors and the new version 2 Fume to help kickstart your positive habits. That's tryfume, tryfum.com, and use the code Campea to save an additional 10% off your order today.
So that's our full statement here. Rob, how does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, you know, this is coming from the man who produced Preacher, the man who produced Invincible, the man who produced The Boys. And he's right in the sense that like, one of the problems I think with American graphic literature is it has been relegated to the idea that it was all for kids. Whereas if you go to Europe and Asia, graphic storytelling is not that way. Like if you go to Japan, manga, you can find manga about a bus driver or a golfer or all kinds of things. So the graphic storytelling medium is for everybody. Mm-hmm. Whereas in this country, the comic medium has been mostly thought of for children. Whether you're reading Archie comics when I was a kid, there was Richie Rich, Jackie Jokers, and Little Dot, you know, which I love Richie Rich, to be honest. But the superhero genre, it wasn't really until you had indie comics and R. Crumb and people like that, and there was a lot of counterculture stuff in the 60s. But for the most part, the comic book industry has always been thought of as kids, for kids. And what I find really interesting is the Western genre was a genre that was for everybody. Cops, lawyers, superheroes, I think, are just an extension of all. Go back to Gilgamesh, go back to gladiators in the arena. Superheroes are just a different iteration of the heroes that we've had in literature since the dawn of time. The problem is American superheroes came out of comics that were in fact directed mostly toward kids, younger audiences, until superheroes started to really underwent a renaissance in the 80s when you had creators like Alan Moore coming in, or Neil Gaiman or Howard Chaykin doing things like American Flag. And there was a lot of, Frank Miller brought in Elektra and Bullseye and killed Elektra in the pages of Daredevil and then went on into Dark Knight Returns. And then Alan Moore did Watchmen and Swamp Thing and V for Vendetta and all that stuff. But here's the thing. I don't think Marvel's movies are directed to kids. I think they're 4-quadrant films that are actually for family audiences. And I don't think that stories that are directed to 4 quadrants and are directed to families, when you say they're just for kids, I think it belittles or diminishes their value. Because, a movie like Civil War, in the comics and in the movie especially, you have 2 men that have a philosophical difference. And this is something that I think that we need more of. I mean, kids, parents, you can go to a movie like Civil War and have discourse about this kind of a political divide. Like, should we have the Superhero Registration Act? Which, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, is a loosely veiled not anagram, but something that's in the real world. Yeah, metaphor for whatever. Call it what you want. And you can have a debate. You can have an actual discussion about this, like lots of great fantasy literature, and you don't have to push people's political buttons directly, but you can have you can go home and talk to your kids about, well, do you think Tony Stark was right, or do you think that Steve Rogers should have run? And these are important things. And great genre cinema has always been for everybody. Now, the funny thing to me about what Seth Rogen is doing, and doing it brilliantly, is their work is not for kids. There is no family component for it. There is no I can't tell my mom to watch The Boys. Yeah. My mom would be like, somebody crawled inside the head of a penis and then blew it up. What are you telling me to watch?
They sure did, Mom.
I'm like, I mean, my mom would be appalled at something like that, but she'd love to see Civil War. Yeah. So here's the thing. I think what Seth Rogen was saying, the real takeaway, the real point that I think is important is he's saying that one is overshadowing the other. And that has to do more with profit. I mean, everyone gets mad at people that make money, that become successful, as if suddenly they're successful and then until they like it. And then when they get tired of it, it's like, oh, let's poo-poo the success that this company has, which I've never understood that, but I get why it happens. It's not like suddenly Marvel's phoning it in, even though you might not like Phase 4. They're still taking shots, man. They're reaching, and I love the fact that Eternals is finding more of an audience on Disney Plus than it found in the theaters. Anyway, I'm rambling. I don't even know what I'm saying at this point.
No worries. No, they're all wonderful points. You're perfect, Rob. Well, and as an adult who also has no children and is, like Seth, consciously decided to not have children, I do disagree, but it's a personal taste thing, right? I think Marvel movies are made for me. I also love these comics very much. I also love animation, which I'm sure a lot of people are like, Owl House is just for kids. And I'm like, but I really like that show and it's really fun for me to watch. It all comes down to personal taste. And what I at least really appreciate in this soundbite, as opposed to others we've heard in the past that really belittle the genre or try to talk about how it's, a cheap thrills thing, or it's not innovative storytelling, or it's not creative, I do appreciate that he sees the value in it. And this is a personal taste thing. At the end of this, the idea too of just the financial dominance, I think is a very truthful statement. A lot of indie films, auteur films do get overshadowed because at the end of the day, this is a entertainment industry. We look at the dollar signs at the end of this. I could have the greatest, most beautiful, lovely story, but I'm a little nobody. And if I try to sell it, it better be really, really great. And a lot of people still aren't going to know about it. It could be one of the most wonderful scripts ever written, but is it going to have the audience that people want?
Well, all you need is to get your famous friends to talk about it, and suddenly you'll get an Academy Award nomination.
Gosh, there we go. That's all I have to do. But I do appreciate, though, at least that this is one of the few times we haven't had these kinds of movies are trash, or this is this. I will take the statement that what is cinema and what isn't. That, again, is so subjective, because I'm sure there's people out there who are like, well, Seth, The Boys isn't cinema. Friggin' love that show. I think it's amazing. I got to watch it early, and I have been hooked ever since. I think it takes the source material and really, really elevates it. But again, is that something that other people will maybe say, there's so many other better stories on television right now than dudes doing cocaine and crawling up each other's penises, which is a great little snippet out of context of being like, what is the show about?
But fun.
It's so fun. So fun.
But I would also say, look, I think that our entire civilization, from political discourse all the way on down, has become much more infantilized than it was when I was growing up. And I would like to see people look, if you love superhero movies, science fiction, fantasy, horror, genre cinema, which I love, but growing up, I also loved other cinema. I like watching the films of Truffaut or Kurosawa. You know, I liked watching Italian neorealist films or watching movies written by Patty Chayefsky, like The Hospital or Network or something like that. I do think that people owe it to themselves to broaden their horizons and broaden their tastes, because you never know what you're going to discover. About yourself. You know, you're going to see, you might see a foreign film that's in a different language than you speak, and it might touch you in ways you were never expecting, because international perspective, you know, every culture has a different perspective on certain things, even daily life, you know, and you might not, unless you experience it, you might not know that. And I think that there's so much out there, and we have so many more ways to see things than we've ever had before, to reach out, branch out, and see other things. So from that end, I appreciate what Seth Rogen is saying. Yeah. But the thing is, it comes down to economics, and people aren't going to see. Look whether it was She Said, whether it was The Fabelmans, whether it was Tar, whether it was Women Talking, whether it was Babylon, no one went to see these movies. And the question is, well, why? You know, there's a number of reasons, but they didn't go, and the studios can't sit there and go, well, we're gonna because we're a nonprofit. We're gonna make films that are important. Sorry, that's not how it works. Yeah. It's show business, not show nonprofit.
Well, I'm wondering, too, if some of these other kind of, you know, awards darling films can figure out kind of what that magic formula is that, you know, Blumhouse has really struck, like we were just talking about, too. These are tiny little engines that we keep talking about, right? So is that just because the genre there, the horror, the excitement gets people to go see those, and maybe something that is a harder look at the realism of life is more difficult to get an audience to go to willingly? Well,
I would say, and I made the point a couple weeks ago about that the Oscar-nominated movies that used to come from studios were also the most popular.
Yes.
And somebody actually made a chart and showed that it was the 90s. This surprised me. More so than the 80s, according to this chart. In the 90s, more box office champs were also the Oscar nominees and Oscar winners than ever before. And that has dwindled over the last 30 years. But if you look at something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that's a movie that was both, it appealed to genre audiences, but at the same time had a lot to say about life in general. It became the most successful A24 film in history worldwide, making over $100 million. And it was more along the lines of, it was wildly entertaining. So I think the studios can't make those movies anymore because they don't make economic sense. Yeah. So hopefully that will change.
I really do hope it changes. I hope we have room for all of these kinds of films, because sometimes you need to take a hard look at something, and sometimes you do need something that's more of an allegorical take at things. Yeah. You know, to your point of being able to sit down with a kid through an X-Men film and talk about, you know, hey, this is a movie about marginalized people. Let's use this as an example to explore that topic with you in a very digestible way. And then we can take some other thing that is not as easily digestible for a small child, but maybe hits a little harder for a grown adult or another person who needs to hear that story told in a different kind of manner. That's the really great thing about different types of genres, is a lot of it is the same storytelling, it's the same message, it's just a different delivery system. Yes. And you, the consumer, get to decide what's most palpable for you. I just hope that we get a wider array of things.
Chris.
Thank you.
That was beautiful stated.
Thanks so much. Well, guys, let us know what you think about Seth Rogen's comments here in the comments down below. I got all flustered. I was like, comments and comments. Let us know what you think.